The next point on what not to do is don't get into businesses you're not passionate about. This is very important. I gave Amazon FBA and AliExpress dropshipping a go. They failed for a number of reasons. I did this while I was still working on RLD. This was in the last couple of years. One big factor was that I hated both businesses. If I enjoyed it, I would have gone back to it a few times, probably hit a winner, but I hate e-commerce. I hate selling products that I don't care about. And I have a business, I have RLD as my mission, and any time away from that, I felt like I was cheating on my wife, right? RLD, revolutionarylifestyledesign.com, is my wife, it's my baby. And I felt like, man, why am I spending time on this? I should have just released another book or done a video course. And my heart just wasn't in it. So that's a really important thing to understand. If you're not passionate about what you do, it's going to be very hard to find the motivation, and you're also not going to be happy with it. Some guys love e-commerce. My man Josh loves e-commerce, but I don't. And if you want to be unhappy and do something you have no passion for, you might as well just work a job. That's my take on it. If you're passionate about e-commerce, then it's a totally different story. Or whatever it is, just make sure that whatever you're doing, you're enjoying what you're doing, because you're going to be doing that 8 to 10 hours a day, 7 days a week for at least the first couple of years. The next point, and it's kind of similar to the last point, is don't start more than one business at a time. With maybe an exception of like, okay, you built the service-based business up over 3 years, and then you can take the shot with the e-com, but you're paying some guy to do 90% of the work, and you're splitting it 50-50. You're the money partner, he's the grinding partner type thing. But for me, I can't do more than one thing at a time. If I try to, the second thing will suffer. In most cases, if you're trying to run 3 businesses, it means that you're not sure about your first business. Okay, so instead of putting all these mediocre ideas out there, you should be doubling down on the best idea instead of trying to do all these hustles, because doing that's going to burn you out. The only time you can have more than one business is when you're rich and you can afford people to do the grunt work. When you're doing 3 businesses, the stuff that burns you out is when you're trying to do like technical problems, data entry, grinding, finding like really boring solutions to boring problems. Okay, if you're P. Diddy, it's easy. He can have the Ciroc vodka, he can have Bad Boy, he can have television shows, because he just pays people to do all the grunt work. He just does the high level fun meetings, and then he just tells everyone else what to do. Okay, that's a totally different story. You can be involved in all kinds of projects like that, but when you're small and you're starting out, and you're involved and you don't have a lot of cash, and you're involved in the grunt work for all those businesses, I don't suggest starting more than one business at a time until you can get rich and pay people to do the grunt work for you. All right. Next point on what not to do is don't partner with the wrong person, if anybody. Okay. I started my first business was a Vice magazine clone that folded because my partner wanted out. And I was dumb enough to let him buy the domain and keep it in his name. And then he was supposed to do the tech work. He didn't do anything. I basically had to learn it all, and I learned how to do WordPress magazine, which really helped me when I did RLD, but he was doing none of that. He wasn't doing anything that he's supposed to. He told me he wanted to be creative director and just contribute ideas occasionally without doing any work. He was super negative. And eventually he wanted out, and he said, okay, I'm taking the site down. If you want to, you're going to pay me for the time that I put in. Okay, none of us were making money at the business. And he tried to ransom the domain back to me. In my tech business, our developer partner went MIA 9 or 10 times. Eventually he went no contact. And because he was such a rock star developer, we couldn't do anything with his code because no one was smart enough to be able to figure out what he was doing. And our business was finished. In that same business, the reason that the other partner brought me on board with that tech business is because he was funding everything, and his partner stole, not the developer, the other partner stole $40,000 of his money that was supposed to be going to the business that he was using to take girls out for dinner. Okay? Insane stuff, right? I mean, you really think you know people, but people are funny around money, and you don't know someone until you're in business with them. And you got to be very, very careful about who you get into business. There's maybe 3 or 4 guys that I know that I would consider doing business with. Okay, and most of those guys I've known for at least 2 years. They say don't do business with your friends, but in reality, you have to do business with your friends, because you have to get to know a guy for 2, 3, 4 years to make sure that he's a solid, trustworthy guy. If you meet a guy at a networking group or whatever, and you're starting a business with him a week later, you don't know who you're getting into bed with, all right? And some bad things can happen. So it's important to understand. Speaking of, to add to that point, don't waste your time networking, okay? No one at networking events has any money. You don't know the majority of the guys that I found are not, they're not my kind of guys. I mean, the last thing you want to do, okay, if a guy has money, he's not going to networking conferences and getting swarmed by a bunch of broke entrepreneurs, okay? Instead, you spend your time building a business that makes money. Like, I'm out here in Thailand, there's all kinds of these digital nomad conferences and guys talking about e-commerce or building a blog. If I go to those conferences and I tell them about my blog or my personal brand, okay, I got 100,000 visitors a month, or 150,000 on RLD, another 400,000 views on RLD, another 400,000 or 100,000 views a month on YouTube. I need a guy who's making 500,000, getting 500,000 monthly visits for me to be able to learn something from him. So the majority of the time, if I'm going to that conference, it's a bunch of guys trying to get information off me. Same thing for the investor who's got a lot of money. It's just a bunch of guys who want his money. The last thing he wants to do is get hounded by those dudes, right? And at those types of things, you'll also meet a lot of guys that I call fantasy businessmen. Okay, they're guys who dress up like businessmen. They speak in buzzwords, but they either don't execute or have delusional expectations. There's a ton of those guys, a ton of entrepreneurs out there. And if you're doing tech business, you'll see them at networking events, at startup drinks, at entrepreneur meetings, at meetup groups, at seminars, at digital nomad meetings, and everywhere in between. And back in the day when I still used to have those conversations, I'd meet so many guys and we'd get hyped up on all these ideas, and then nothing would come to it because they weren't executing, or I could tell that their expectations weren't in line with the reality. They didn't know how much work really needed to be done, and just a waste of time. Okay, we had one guy at my tech accelerator who was a trust fund guy. He was in his 40s. He'd been there for 2 years. He had no revenue, and every meeting he would talk about how he's going to get the client of Japan on board for his business. He was like, when I get Japan on board for this, everything's going to change. Literally, the country of Japan was what he was selling to other people. Of like, this is what's, my business is going to be built on this. Like, he had no revenue for 2 years. Like, crazy stuff. Okay. Next point is, if you can, avoid starting a business where you need to manage people. Okay. We'll get into the tech business, and if you're exceptional, because that is going to be management. But for most of you guys in the service-based business that I recommend, it's like 90% of your headaches come from managing people. I'm a sole proprietor here at RLD. If I want something done, I just find a guy on Elance, or I find one of my friends. I use Matt Lawrence for my book covers, and I just pay them to do it. Okay, I don't have to manage anyone. I was like, here, this is what I want you to do. Come back to me when it's done, and I'll pay. All right. 90% of business stress comes from managing people. I managed people when I was in sales. It was a nightmare. I'm responsible for all their targets. Then, data and metrics are predictable, but people aren't. People are not reliable or accountable on average. And then you've got the headaches, the responsibility, and even more than that, if you're a new business, now you've got payroll to meet every month, okay? For yourself, it's different. You can live on, when you're building a business, you can baseline it and you can live on, chicken and rice for 6 months if you have to. But your employee's not going to want to live on that, right? He's not going to stick around. So now you got payroll to meet, and that just adds a totally another level of stress on top of something that's already stressful, which is starting a business. So, I recommend, at least for your first business, for your starter business, the sole proprietorship way is the way to go. If you want something done, pay people on contract for it to do it. And you can always add more people into the equation when you have a lot more money. But ideally, what you'd want to do, and what I'll do as I scale up, is I'll just get someone to manage. I'll still have the contractors, but then you just get some guy that you trust to manage all the contractors. He deals with all the headaches. You pay him to deal with the headaches. He sends you a weekly report of what's going on. That's a much preferable model for me than getting everyone in an office and having to manage 10 people and payroll and all this mess. Okay. Don't next point on what not to do, don't get into a business with an informational disadvantage. Okay, this is something that I learned from the tech business. As I mentioned before, I was in business with me, my buddy Zach, and this kid who was a rock star developer. And even though we were paying the guy a living wage, not taking anything for ourselves, this kid was still doing like 2 or 3 hour work days. He was totally unreliable. He would go MIA all the time, but no one else could do what he did. Okay, you can't just find another rockstar developer. You can't just find another programmer that's at that high level. This kid could literally build anything. He's a genius. And so we had to coax him back, like, hey man, you come back. We couldn't, go hard on him because he would just run off, and it was a total mess. And then when he finally went totally MIA, our business was finished because no one else could figure out his code. No one else could do anything with what he was doing because he was just on such another level. And neither Zach and I could program at all. And we were just in such a massive informational disadvantage. And after that blew up, I told myself, I'll never be in a business where I don't know exactly how everything works. So if there's a problem, if I choose to partner with someone, which again is a dangerous thing to do, I can do everything, right? So I can hire a bunch of people for RLD, or I can hire a guy to manage RLD and manage my contractors or whatever. But if there's any problem with him or the contractors, I can do every single thing for RLD. I can do the majority of the technical work. I can do the video, the SEO, the marketing, the Facebook, everything, okay? And that's the position I want to be in.